Hello and welcome to Make the Logo Bigger. My name is Brenton. This podcast is your gateway into the world of advertising production, crafted especially for those who are stepping in new, aiming to become producers, or simply eager to understand the inner workings of advertising and marketing. We're here to share insights and knowledge you've been looking for, with stories, tips, and real conversations from the pros. We're simplifying the process for everyone with a production curiosity. Whether you're just starting out or keen to explore the production side of ads, you've found the right place. Let's jump in. Our guest today is Andrew Siwka, a trailblazer in the advertising world with a unique journey from marine biology to co-founding the Royals ad agency. Andrew's path combines unconventional beginnings and a love for creativity that has taken him across the globe, from Melbourne to Sao Paulo, New York, and London. Andrew's expertise in account service and management within ad agencies has given him a deep understanding of the industry. He shares insights into how production teams are essential for bringing creative ideas to life and the qualities that make a great producer: drive, positivity, flexibility, and a knack for balancing budgets within creative goals. In this conversation, Andrew talks about the importance of involving production teams early in the creative process and building trust within the agency. He also discusses effective project management and how the lines between account service and production roles are becoming more fluid. Join us as we explore the world of advertising with Andrew Siwka, learning from his journey, the insights he has gained, and his vision for the future of production within creative agencies. Andrew Siwka. Andrew, thank you so much for jumping on, mate. Appreciate you taking the time out. Let's jump straight into it. Can you share with us your journey in advertising? And then after that, can you just give us a bit of detail about why you actually co-founded the Royals?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brendan. Nice to catch up with you again, actually, after quite some time. My history into advertising is probably not as traditional as some. I'm a marine biologist by trade, so an unusual kind of place to start, I think. But as I realised when I was going through my final year of university, that I realised that whilst I'm passionate about the oceans and the sea, the idea of spending the next 50 years of my life in a lab or looking at the bottom of a glass bottom boat didn't seem to appeal. So I started a search for something else, and I wasn't really too sure about what that was. And someone started talking to me about their life as a copywriter, and they talked about life in an agency, and that seemed something that I wanted to explore more. Whilst copywriting wasn't my thing, they described this role of account management as something that I thought would be something that I could apply my personal strengths to. And so back in my day, which is quite some time ago, they used to have, the Advertising Federation of Australia used to have these internships where people could get into account service. All they had to do was have a degree in something, and I had a degree in something, which was good. And then you would apply for the opportunity to have a year in an agency where you moved between different departments and really understood what the machinations of an agency were like. And so I did some work experience in an agency called Grey Advertising, which is famous for making TAC ads, and amongst other things, but primarily that it's most famous for. Did 2 weeks work experience there so that it would make my CV look a bit better. I never left. Well, I left 8 years later. So they offered me a job after my 2 weeks of work experience and never had to do the AFA traineeship. And my start in advertising began, which was the start of an amazing and awesome adventure journey, which, I'm still loving to this day. I then moved on to, other agencies in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, Bangkok, Sao Paulo, New York, London. So the journey was quite extensive. Now back to Australia and owning my own agency, which is, the enthusiasm for this industry and passion for it continues. So it's taken me into some weird and wonderful places, and I thank you for that.
And then the Royals, was it better to own your own and be your own boss than work for someone else?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was probably motivated by a few things. I think it was motivated by just an itch that needed to be scratched in terms of having to, feel like I owned something and my trade was in advertising, so naturally the business that I started was an advertising business. But it could have been anything. I think at some point in my life, I knew that I had to try that, have a crack. But I think that what advertising and account service, account management, business management had taught me was a lot of an amazing array of skills. The exposure that I got to various businesses over those previous 20 years in agencies and working for clients it just gave me a fantastic grounding for starting a business, let alone an advertising one. So I was passionate about that. The foundations of the Royals began when Steve O'Farrell, my business partner, and I were sent as part of a multinational to New York for 3 days to talk about making redundancies globally. We were working off a spreadsheet which kind of felt like it applied very little humanity to. And we hopped back on the plane after 3 intensive days and looked at each other and said there has to be a better way than what we just went through. And that was kind of the catalyst for creating what then became the Royals by name. But that's where it sort of all started. And I think the basis of the Royals was really kind of from having humanity at its core, like understanding the creative process and understanding the people who are so important to an agency, and understanding what kind of makes them tick and how do we get the best out of those people to get to the best work possible. And that's kind of where we started. And that was, we're 13 in September 1. That's our birthday. And yeah, it's been an extraordinary trip that we've been on, and yeah, it's pretty proud of what we've achieved so far.
Have you always been surrounded by production teams at all the ad agencies you've worked at?
Definitely, they're incredibly key to our ability to take ideas and make them happen. If we get back to the idea of doing and making, which is so incredibly important, there is ideas are nothing until they actually make it into the world. And I think kind of that's where production people add so much value. I think the term production kind of undervalues what they do somewhat. It makes it sound a bit mechanized, I think, in some ways. And I think that does it a disservice. I think it's an incredibly important part of the creative process. And not just in terms of making things happen. They actually add value to the creativity and the ideas through the making.
Well, on that, and now from your experience within advertising, what qualities would you believe, or what do you think makes a standout producer?
I think there's some fundamentals of that don't change, and I think there are some that probably have over the years, particularly in the modern agency landscape, that are probably a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I think kind of some of the fundamentals of production, a sense of hustle, of making things happen, of overcoming kind of the inevitable, the roadblocks and challenges that happen in any making process that you have to overcome. And I think kind of a real sense of hustle, it needs to be built into any good production person. I make things happen, and I make things happen fast, and I'm able to adapt on the fly to the inevitable challenges that are going to be presented to me. So definitely over-index on hustle. They also need to over-index on positivity, because I think that I've seen how easily you can fall into, I can't do this, or that's not possible, or we don't have enough money for that. And I think that all of which is possible through any process. There are things that are not possible. There are things that you don't have the budget for, and there are things that you don't have the time for. No doubt. It's not that anything is possible, but it's definitely the attitude that you come to that with, and a positive can-do attitude is a key. I think a side note to that is all production people need to be really, really good at saying no. And I mean that in that they need to find a way to say no that doesn't feel like a no. And I think that is a really fine art. Like the really, really good production people, they're saying no. You go, I think it sounded like yes, but I think I just got told no. And that's really hard to teach. But I think it's kind of built over years and years of kind of, I don't know, your family environment and the working environment you're in, or I don't know whether or not it's something that a third child is really bad at and a first child is great at. I don't know. I'm sure there's some science to that level of that. I think also adaptability, which is probably more modern in how things are quickly changing in terms of the techniques and the way that things have been, the modern technology, etc., that are available to people from a making and a producing point of view, is that I think kind of being adaptable and love learning new things, a voracious yearning for knowledge when it comes to finding better ways is something that's really important these days. May not have been previously, but definitely is now with the speed of change. And probably lastly, is again that balance between, because where production people sit is right in that sweet spot between delivering against time, and budget, and against a specific brief, but also in terms of enhancing the creative process and making the product better, and sort of understanding how you balance those two, which is sometimes in conflict. But this would make it a lot better, but we don't have the budget to do this because ultimately we're a commercial enterprise. Finding that ability to balance those two things is again really important, and too often we see people who fall into too much of the budget conscious, and other times you find people who are just interested in kind of almost being part of the creative department. And I think kind of straddling the two is a key quality of any production person. I really believe that, and it's not just production, it's anyone within a creative agency, is the thing that you have to start with is find ways to build trust amongst the people that you are working with or for. And that's exaggerated within an environment that is so ridiculously subjective like ours. So how do you define what is a good idea? How do you define what makes an idea better, etc.? And I think kind of you've got to find ways in which, particularly in a production point of view, where you're trying to appease so many masters from a commercial perspective, but also from a creative product perspective, and trying to balance those two out. How you find ways in which you reinforce to the account management side of people to say that you care about the budget, that you care about the commercial realities of any given project. And how do you make sure that you have the trust of the creative people who have something that's called an idea that is just incredibly delicate throughout the whole process. It starts with something, and they need to feel a level of trust with the people who are making it, who are entrusted with finding makers in terms of the production people, that that they understand what is important to keeping true to the idea. And so I think you kind of got to find ways to build that trust, and that means expressing to creative people that you understand their idea, intimately, that you understand what's important about the idea, what can change about the idea, and what cannot change about the idea, because then it starts to actually deflate the value of the idea. And similarly with account service people, where you can talk to them and go, look, if we invest a little bit more money here, you will get a better outcome, which will enhance your relationship with your client. Or this is one place where we won't get that, so as a result, we're not going to invest. And being able to find slowly but surely over a number of projects to build that confidence and trust is really key. And that's something that, regardless of the department of an agency you're in the build trust really quickly, because it makes your job easier and gets you better outcomes.
Let's talk about the creative process. So I guess, can you outline the creative process, let's just say from an agency's perspective, especially how production integrates, with the other stages like strategy and concept development?
Yeah, I think for me, the earlier the production people get involved, the better. not to be wasteful. I think it's probably the opposite. I think that there's probably no place for them necessarily in the strategy components. If you took a traditional agency process, it starts with a client giving a brief. It goes into the strategy department or the strategy person, whether or not they're a department or not, whether account service play that role, who then start to develop an idea as to what the problem is that we need to solve. So define that to then go into the creative department in the form of a brief. And I think once you've actually, that for me, through the briefing process, is probably a good time for production to be lightly involved, not heavily, lightly. So they understand what the problem is and they're part of the briefing, so they get a sense of what the challenge is. And they can hear in detail what the challenge is. They then don't necessarily need to be involved in the ideation process or vetting of those ideas necessarily early on, in the early stages of idea formation, but they should come back in more once we think that we've got through the early discussions around ideas within the agency. Once you've kind of worked out you've got something you think is quite good, that answers the client brief, that is interesting from a creative perspective, validating that as the possibility and probably even the viability of those particular ideas, is with the production people is I think they start to play a role. Is this idea as it currently stands possible, or is there another way of being able to bring this idea to life that actually is more possible in a production sense? Understand the idea and possibly enhance that with a better way of being. You may change the idea slightly that enhances its ability to get made, because remember that creative people just want their ideas to get made. They don't want them to end up in a deck that goes to client, that the client goes, wow, that's a great idea, but I can't make it. There's not much value associated with that. What is of value is, this is a great idea, and by the way, we know a way in which we can make it happen. And giving confidence to client at that point when you present it, when they go, oh, that's a great idea, but I don't understand how the hell you're going to make that. And if you can give them confidence at that moment, that says, no, we've had a bit of a think about that, and we think we can make this for the budget that you have if we do X, Y, and Z, then that firstly enhances the ability to get the idea up, which is step one, and B is that from efficiency and perspective, you're selling in an idea that you're not going to go back to client with and say, hey, by the way, I know you like this idea, but we can't make it for the budget that you have. And that's incredibly frustrating for the client at times when you kind of go, so why did you present that idea to me? You knew what my budget was, you knew what my problem was, and now you're telling me that the idea that I loved cannot be made for, within 10% of the budget that I gave you. And that's incredibly frustrating and actually hurts relationships between clients and agency. So I think kind of at that point in the process, production people understanding what the brief is, whether they're in the briefing or whether or not they're actually exposed to the brief early on. Secondly, so if they understand the brief, when the creatives come to them with the ideas and say, this is what I want to make, can it be made? Or do you have another way of being able to adapt the idea to get it being made? And then once clients bought it, to then kind of take that and embrace that idea and then get partners, more than likely external partners, to be able to help make that, whether it be film or print or digital production. Quite often you're going to need to use external partners to be able to bring those things to life. So I think kind of then that's the third phase of where they really add value.
There seems to be that production may not always necessarily be lent on in the early stages. Do you believe that is something that there's maybe some truth to that?
No, I think there's definitely it's an issue in many agencies, and it's an issue in different agencies at different times, because we're made up of people and relationships. Within the same culture, you can get two different people that operate in different ways that previously there wasn't an issue or a disconnect, and then suddenly there is one. So I think it's a really easy problem to have,
Mhm.
So I think because you've got a lot of forces at play, I think this comes back to the trust thing. I think when you have someone that you feel is adding value to the process from the word go, you involve them more often, more quickly. I think, from that point of view, is breaking down of those barriers initially, and probably structurally how a department is set up. So we're probably set up. I know there's numbers of different ways. There's ways in which production sits more within business management side, and there's ways in which production sits more in creative services. So they either report to the group, the client services director, or they report into the creative director. But then there are also models where they sit in between, where they sit into a head of production that, whilst they don't report to the creative director or the client services director, they report to the CEO. And they're a separate function that more represents where they sit within an organisation, which is between the two. And they need to understand that they do sit between the two, and feel very comfortable in being Switzerland, if you like. They need to be good at understanding the opposing forces, being able to embrace those to get to great outcomes, both from a commercial perspective and also from a creative perspective. If you sit in one camp versus the other, I think that it leads to you feeling like you're representing one more than the other. Yeah, and that I think at times leads to resentment from the department that they're not sitting in. You're not really representing my interests. You're representing kind of opposing interests, and that creates conflict where and I think that then leads to the detriment of the idea.
Hiring philosophy. What do you look for candidates when building a production team?
Attitude. I mean, I think this probably applies to all hires for me from an agency point of view, but probably again over indexes with production is that I think that the attitude that you come into it with is imperative.
Mm-hmm.
So that bit is really hard to teach. The kind of the technical aspects easier. You assume that you're ensuring that as far as any hiring process that their capacity for learning is high, their enthusiasm for learning is high, but their personal attributes as far as attitude, that's what I'm really looking for. And then we come back to those things of, a sense of hustle, a sense of positivity, a sense of adaptability, those three categories that they can demonstrate in their broader life. So, where have you shown hustle, positivity, and adaptability in the face of challenges in various parts of your life to date? And they don't actually have to have had anything to do with production. They don't have to have any production experience whatsoever. But I'm looking for ways in which they can demonstrate that, with their part-time work, with the way that they have gotten into university through back doors, that they have had, upbringings that have made that essential. I know they're one of 7 kids on a farm. I go, mate, if I wasn't adaptable and had a shit ton of hustle, then I would never have, I would never be even in this room today. Show me ways in which you've demonstrated some of the core fundamental attitude strengths that I need for being in production. That's what I'm looking for. And as you get more experienced, you then start asking them, kind of demonstrating exactly those same things, but using real world production experiences. But before you have those, if you haven't demonstrated that in your day to day life, you know what I mean? Like you're probably going to struggle in production.
What are some common misunderstandings that production teams might have about working within a creative agency?
I think some of the common misperceptions that people have is that they fall into either one of those camps that are described as kind of they're not interested in the ideas, they're just interested in time, scope, and budget. Or that they're not interested in time, scope, and budget. They're too interested in getting into the ideas. Both of those misperceptions are probably brought about by kind of the fact that they sit in those two opposing camps, and if they kind of favour one more than the other, and invariably in any project, one kind of the balancing act is always there's a little bit of more of one than the other at any given time, but you hope that it's all about swings and roundabouts, and that sometimes you got to kind of that you're going to sacrifice a bit of budget to be able to get to a better outcome, and sometimes you're kind of like going, I'm going to make sure that the commercials are looked after here, because the upside from a creative idea, quality of output isn't actually going to be enhanced in that circumstance. So I think kind of the major misperception for me is that you sit in one camp or the other too much. Yep. And I think kind of as a result, you need to work really hard at making sure that neither camp feels like that they're the favourite child. You need to work very hard at making sure that both of your children are feeling equally loved at any given point in time. It's a balancing act, but that's part of your job.
Adding value. How do you define adding value in the context of a producer's role?
They are in the adding value department. You could actually change production to the adding value department. And I think that that is what they're all about. The really, really good people think of themselves as that. And that's all they're trying to do the whole time. Everything from producing a timeline is the way that they make a timeline adds value. They can fight for additional time at the right places in the creative process to enhance the creative product at its most basic level. Timelines is probably seen as somewhat of an administrative process, but it can be such a quality enhancement part of the process as well if you've got that kind of adding value mindset. So I think kind of they add value in terms of making the ideas better, in terms of taking something that's conceptual and theoretical and making it real. And that can be a really tricky part of the process, right? Because it kind of, you go, that looked really good in a storyboard. Yeah. When that creative director sold that in, that was amazing. And that sounded like such a good idea, but now I've seen it, that's not what I really hoped it would be. So I think that there's, being able to take that idea and work with the creative people to make sure that it comes to life in exactly the right ways is really important. I liken this to, my wife is an artist, and she often describes how artists back in the day were not necessarily makers. They would concept things and then give it to a maker to create. And so, for example, they come up with an idea for a bronze bust, but they're not bronze makers. They would design what they wanted the bust to look like. Then they had to rely on someone else to make sure that concept was brought to life in a way that was worthy of it sitting in the Musée d'Orsay, for example. Yeah. So how does it go from a concept to being something that's real that then people just go, wow? And I think kind of there's a part of again, in the modern production process, if you took kind of the creative people who come up with this idea, but until it lives and is, a piece of film or an outdoor or a photograph or all the things that need to be taking it from a scamp on a piece of paper and a concept to actually being kind of alive in the world and realized. I think, again, back to, how do you add value, is that you are really good at understanding the vision for what the creative person has and being able to work with them closely to bring that to life at a creative end. And then similarly, you understand from a commercial perspective, you understand where you can push a budget and where you can make the respective savings. So when you come up with the original estimate for how much things are going to cost, they're an estimate, and you've kind of gotten a sense of that. But as you go through the creative process and you realize where I need to spend more time on the post-production here because this is quite a complicated, what we shot needs some more post. I also understand that I'll be able to, make some savings potentially in the type of talent that we need, because I know that I don't need the level of performance that I need from this. I need to overinvest in the post-production rather than the performance of the talent. And so as a result, that then allows you to manage the budgetary and the commercial considerations and add value there. Yeah. So it's not, I'll just get whatever talent. and I'll just kind of work to the budget that I was given from a post-production perspective. I understand the give and take that's required even in the commercial aspects of what I have to get to the outcome. So I'm again back to I'm appeasing both of my masters or keeping both my children happy in the balancing act that you do have in production.
For those starting new careers in agency land, let's say an agency production team, what advice would you give them?
Don't work from home. I think that get exposure to as much as you possibly can, and that's not gained from being at home. I get the relative balances of, we're 3 days in office, and I get that, and I think that we can get to great outcomes from a greater point of view with that. I think it's essential that you have people together for the moments that matter in a creative process. But I think that one of the real downsides of working from home is the ability for young people to learn a lot really fast by being exposed to a broad variety of things, not structured in terms of you're going to learn something, so we're going to set up a meeting for you to learn. I mean this in terms of you see things, you hear things that happen in the periphery that you get exposed to that enable you to learn faster. And so I think that, your ability to absorb as much information early on and get exposed to things when you're not necessarily responsible. There's been a couple of times in my career that I got promoted ahead of my experience base, and in a couple of those instances that probably set me back a little bit. And I think that's not because I wasn't capable or I wasn't smart enough, neither which is probably both of those things set me back. But I think that your exposure to experiences, safe experiences, where other people are in charge of them, but you're able to see the decisions that they make or the mistakes that they make and learn from those. That's imperative. I think if you want to go onto an accelerated learning curve in production, is expose yourself to as many bits of the production process as often as possible. And that's from seeing other people doing it, not reading emails or watching YouTube videos. It's seeing things in action in real time where people are making decisions on the fly. Am I going to go X and Y? Am I going to make a call or not? Am I going to do this or that? They're all things that happen that you when you see them firsthand being made, that's where you really learn, and that's where you understand when you're placed into exactly the same situation in 3 years' time, you're better armed to be able to make the right call.
With the ever-evolving landscape of the advertising world, do you foresee a future where more account service people will be asked to take on the roles of, say, the production people?
Yes, I think it's already happening. I think we're already seeing a massive blurring between pure account service and production. I think kind of this kind of sense of project management skill applies over both. So you can't be good at account service without really strong project management skills. You can't be good at production without really strong project management skills. So as a result, as a natural consequence, there's an overlap between the two people. I think that they then have relative strengths outside of that. Yeah. I also believe that you can't be good at account service without understanding production processes, and you can't be good at production without being able to manage clients and their expectations directly. Yeah. So again, both of them need to actually effectively be pulling from the same broader skill set, but the relative strengths and weaknesses come in where the emphasis is on both the tasks, but both of those roles. Yeah. So I think that that account service people need to over-index on their ability to understand client challenges and the client problems and be able to manage the client's expectations. They need to over-index on that. Yep. So if they're 90 in that, production people need to be a 20. They can't be a 0. They need to be they need to understand that is part of their role, and they need to be reasonably okay at it. Similarly with production people, both of them need to be kind of 90% on the PMing, project management piece. They need to manage the time, they need to understand scope that they're managing to, and they need to manage to a budget. Both of those roles need to do that. And the production people need to over-index on the ability of being able to bring an idea to life. So they have to over-index on the creative sensibility side, which isn't, they're not a manufacturer, they're an enhancer. They're not a machine that produces widgets. They're an adaptable manufacturing device that's able to enhance and adjust accordingly, to take a bit of an industrialization kind of analogy.
Andrew, thank you so much for today, mate. Really appreciate you taking time to jump on and chat. I know there's going to be a lot of people, not only just junior producers or production people coming through, but even people within agencies that will gain insight. And I know that there are people that really value what you have to say, because, again, you're in there doing it and owning your own ad agency and making it happen. So really appreciate you taking out the time just to chat.
Thank you, Brendan. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And when we talk through a number of the qualities that we talked about from a production point of view, I think you're well placed to be able to talk about those, because my experience has been exactly that. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for the kind words, mate. Thank you. Well, that's it for today. I'll make the logo bigger. Thanks for hanging out with us. We've shared some insights and stories that I hope you found useful. Whether you're just getting started or diving deeper into ad production, there's always more to explore. Keep listening, stay curious, and we'll be back soon with some more from the world of production. Take care until then.